Congrats on getting booked for a podcast interview. If the podcast host sent you this video, it's because they want you to sound as good as possible. And I'm going to quickly give you some tips on how to sound like a pro. And I have a dozen tips for you, starting with the most important, and that is to listen to an episode beforehand. Every podcast is different. Some are long and conversational, some are focused and to the point. Some will edit the episode to make you sound good, and some don't edit at all. Some will have multiple guests, and some will have a live audience or an in-person fact checker. So set yourself up for success and listen to an episode ahead of time. Get a feel for the format and the host. If you're on a big media tour and you're doing dozens of interviews a week, listen to at least the first 5 minutes of each show before you go on. Some of the most embarrassing podcasting faux pas tend to happen when the guest is not familiar with the show. Don't go on Joe Rogan if you don't know who Jamie is, or if you're not prepared to talk about your topic for at least 3 hours. You've all heard it happen. Feel free to share your examples in the comments. My second tip is to ask about the audience. So podcast interviews tend to start with some off-the-record chit-chat and tech setup. So during that time, ask the host about the audience. Why do they listen to the podcast? How advanced are they on the topic? You don't want to be too advanced and complicated, but you also don't want to be too patronizing. And the only way to get that balance is to ask the host about the topic and the audience ahead of time. Also, ask the host about the goal for the episode. Does the host want your story, or does the host want you to go straight to the tips? If the host doesn't have a goal, expect the episode to have a more conversational tone. Yes, you want to promote your book or your business, but you have to make the episode a success first. You have to thrill the audience first, and then you get a chance to promote your thing. A good interview is a dance between the host and the guest, and the better you are at dancing, the more the audience will like you, and the more likely you are to be invited back. And the more likely the host is to recommend you as a guest to other podcasters. Once you start doing a good job as a podcast guest, you'll start to have invites flood in without you even having to ask. I'm going to talk about gear in a moment, but first I want to talk about some free things you can do to improve your sound. So let's talk about microphone technique. And the first tip is to keep a consistent distance from the microphone. Moving in and out, kind of where you're moving or swaying side to side, doesn't sound good. It can make the listener dizzy, especially if there's no video version, or for pure listeners who are out on a jog or in their car. Using a microphone arm really helps because it allows you to put the microphone right where you want it to be. I also recommend that you place the microphone slightly off axis. You don't want to be spitting into your microphone. This will help prevent popping plosives from words like popcorn and puppet. So that P sound creates a lot of wind, and that wind can make a boom in the microphone. Particularly cheaper microphones can have a big boom. And if you use proper microphone technique, you won't need to buy a bulky pop filter, and you don't need an expensive microphone. So I'm right now talking on the Shure SM7B, which is the microphone that a lot of podcast hosts use, but it's a very expensive microphone. Yes, it has a built-in pop filter, but you don't need to buy this microphone. We'll get to the microphones in a second. But first, speak up. You want to talk past the microphone. You don't want to shout, but speaking at your full voice will make you sound more confident, and it will also allow the recording software to turn down the gain on your microphone, which will bring in less room noise, less road noise, and be less likely to pick up your dog or your kids on the other side of the door. If you're talking quietly, not only will you sound timid, but the host will have to boost you in post, which will make your air conditioning suddenly a guest on the podcast. You don't want that. So talk at your full, confident voice. Also, be careful not to bump the microphone. Cheap microphones turn tiny bumps into loud booms. And I thought about demonstrating this, what it sounds like, but for the sake of those of you listening on earbuds, don't worry, I won't. I'll save your ears, and just believe me that bumps sound bad. A good microphone arm will prevent bumps. All right, so now it's time to talk about the gear. And I recommend that you buy a real microphone. The ancient Romans had a saying, vestis virum redit, or in English, the clothes make the man. People judge you by the clothes that you wear, and podcast listeners judge you by your microphone. And if you don't believe me, here's how I sound on the built-in microphone. You'll notice this does not sound the same as using a real microphone. Sure, people could get used to this, but it doesn't sound professional. Nothing says I'm a credible guest like a real microphone. And nothing says I'm an amateur like using the built-in microphone on your laptop. If you're trying to present yourself as a successful person, don't wear clothes with holes and don't use the built-in laptop microphone. Don't worry, good microphones are cheaper than they've ever been. Trust me, when I started podcasting in 2007, the options back then were bleak. So for a palate cleanser, here's how I sound on the built-in microphone. Here's how I sound on the Samson Q2U. You can usually find this microphone on Amazon for less than $70. This is a dynamic microphone that will last forever. You can plug it directly into your computer via USB, so you don't have to buy any fancy gear, and it has a headphone jack on the back, so you can monitor your voice with your headphones. The downside of this microphone is that it's a little less flattering for female voices, and it doesn't look like a podcast microphone for video podcasts. But other than that, I love this microphone, particularly for the price. If you want to step it up, I recommend the Rode PodMic USB. This is a dynamic microphone that does everything that the Q2U does, but has a built-in pop filter and a richer, fuller sound. It also looks more like a podcast mic on camera. And you can typically find this microphone on Amazon for around $199.
Hi, I'm Margaret Umstadt, and this is what a female voice sounds like with a built-in microphone.
And here is how my voice sounds on the $70 Samson Q2U. And here is how my voice sounds on the $199 Rode PodMic USB. And here is my voice on a $400 Shure SM7B using a $100 Fathead preamp and a $700 Rodecaster Pro 2.
There are a lot of good microphones out there, and anything is better than nothing. The thing to look for in a podcasting microphone is the word dynamic. Dynamic microphones are what we use in radio, and it's what all of the top podcasters use. And with a dynamic microphone, you don't have to worry about acoustically treating your room or road noise. They tend to be very blind to everything but the voice that they're capturing. You want to avoid condenser microphones like the Yeti. I know. But the Yeti is awful. Condenser microphones work best for music, but they pick up a lot of room noise. And it takes a lot of work to get a good podcast sound out of a condenser microphone. It can be done. And if you already have a Yeti, I'll have a link to an entire video on how to get the Yeti to sound good. It can be done, but it does take extra work. Whether you have an expensive microphone or a cheap microphone, I have one tip that will make you sound better, and that is to buy a microphone arm. A cheap microphone 4 fingers away is better than an expensive microphone sitting at your desk. Here is what I sound like 4 fingers away from the Shure SM7B, which is my main microphone. And here is how I sound with that microphone sitting on my desk. It's the exact same microphone, but when it's sitting on the desk, or where it would be if it were on the desk, it doesn't sound nearly as good. A lot of people don't like the way they sound when they listen to their voice, and really the problem is just that the microphone is too far away. You can't get a good microphone 4 fingers away with the stand that the microphone came with. And here's the crazy thing. You can buy a microphone arm for less than $20 and get same-day shipping on Amazon. So it's better to get a cheap microphone and pay for an arm than it is to get an expensive microphone that has to sit on a pile of books on your desk. Don't do that. My next tip is to buy headphones. One of the biggest differences between podcasts and TV is the headphones. If you watch video versions of most of the popular podcasts, you will notice that everyone is wearing headphones, the host and the guest. For remote interviews, headphones eliminate notification sounds, echoes, and the need for software echo cancellation, which hollows out the sound. That's why Zoom recorded interviews don't sound quite as good. It's because they often use echo cancellation, which just doesn't sound quite as good. For in-person interviews, headphones help ensure consistent audio quality. And a pro tip is to plug your headphones into the microphone. Most USB microphones have a headphone jack, and if you plug your headphones into that jack, you can then go into your computer's system settings and set the microphone as both your microphone and as your speakers. With this, you can hear both the host and yourself in your headphones, which will help you hear those bumps and other audio issues and will help you eliminate them. Podcast listeners often listen to podcasts with high-quality Bluetooth headphones or earbuds, and savvy podcasters know to optimize the listening experience for those listeners. If you sound good on good quality headphones, you'll sound good for everyone. The kind of headphones you want are wired monitor headphones, which are actually some of the cheapest headphones you can buy. You can get a pair of Samson SR350s on Amazon for less than $20. They're plastic and they won't work if you're wearing them all day, every day. But for the occasional podcast interview, these will perform better than that expensive pair of Bluetooth headphones that you have. The problem with Bluetooth headphones is that they will make it more likely that you fall into the classic blunder of selecting the wrong microphone, because every Bluetooth headphone has a built-in microphone. Also, the Bluetooth radio on the headphones can sometimes interfere with the microphone audio quality. So wires are your friend when your goal is high audio quality. It's not about how much you spend. Cheap wired headphones are better than expensive Bluetooth headphones. And I'll say I have affiliate links for all the microphones and arms and headphones that I mention in this episode in the description below the video. And I also have a comprehensive podcast gear guide at podcast.parts. It has recommendations not just for podcast guests, but also for hosts at various price points and also for various needs, depending on if you're doing remote recording or whatever. And you can find that at www.podcast.parts. And I'll also have a link to the podcast.parts guide in the blog version of this episode. Speaking of testing, you want to test your setup. The day before the interview, log into the software that your podcast host uses. So Riverside.fm, Squadcast.fm, Zencastr, StreamYard. These all have test rooms or green rooms where you can test your setup. And I'll also say they all work better on Chrome. So make sure you have Chrome, make sure it's up to date. Safari and Firefox are great for surfing the web, but they don't work well for podcasting. Also, close any extra browser tabs you have open. You would be surprised how many problems are solved when you close the extra tabs. If the podcast host is using Zoom, make sure that you have the most recent version of Zoom installed on your computer. And on the day of the interview, make sure to tap your microphone to make sure that all the settings are set correctly. One of the classic blunders in podcasting is spending money on a fancy microphone only for the recording software to listen to your laptop's built-in microphone because you left it as the default. This happens to almost every podcast guest at some point. And feel free to share your horror stories in the comments. I once recorded an entire episode using my laptop's built-in microphone, and this was after 10 years of podcasting. I knew better, and I still made the mistake. And so now I try to always tap the microphone and have my guest tap the microphone just to be double sure. Before we go, let me give you some quick performance tips. One is not to say uh-huh while the host is speaking. In a normal conversation, it's very natural to say uh-huh while the other person is speaking. It shows that you're paying attention and that you're an active listener. But for podcast listeners, when they hear two voices in their ears, it sounds chaotic and hard to hear. As humans, we use our eyes to focus our ears, especially in a crowded environment. And when something is audio only, individual voices can be very hard to differentiate. So resist your soul's urge to say uh-huh, and instead just nod and smile. This is a podcast, not cable news, so try not to interrupt, even with a friendly uh-huh. The next tip is to promote the podcast. Podcast hosts love guests who help promote their shows. You're on a podcast tour because you have something to promote. The host booked you in hopes that you would help promote the podcast. The more you promote the show, the more likely you are to be invited back. So share the episode on social media and link to it in your press kit and potentially include a link in your next email newsletter. Then, in your thank you note to the podcast host after the interview, make sure to include all the places where you shared the interview. Most podcasts have friends of the show, and these are people who get invited back frequently. Episode promotion is a great way to become a friend of the show. So what you want the host to say is, I'd love to have you back anytime. This is code for the next time you have something to promote, you're welcome back on my show to help get the word out. Speaking of promotion, don't forget to like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. YouTube channels are judged by the number of subscribers, and it's hard for new channels to get respect. So I really appreciate those of you who subscribe to this channel, particularly in these early days. Finally, smile and have fun. The best way to sound high energy is to force your face to smile. listeners can hear your smile. Guests who don't smile sound bored or tired, even if they're having a great time. Podcasting is show business, and it's a lot easier to act your way into a new way of feeling than it is to feel your way into a new way of acting. And this is particularly true when you're doing that 5 a.m. radio interview for some radio station on the other side of the country. Smile, it'll make you sound awake. And it's good if you feel nervous. That feeling of excitement is the energy you need to record a great episode. Enjoy the moment. You're about to speak into a microphone and people all over the world will be able to hear your voice. That's incredible. Your ancestors would have seen this as magic, so don't let the magic fade. Have fun, smile, you're going to do great. If you have questions, feel free to leave a comment. I'll do my best to personally answer the first few dozen questions. I've spent an embarrassing amount of money testing podcast gear over the years, and I could geek out on gear for days. If you want help on getting more guest interviews, I have podcast episodes on how to do a media tour. I even have a whole course called How to Get Booked as a Podcast Guest. And you can find all of that at the blog version of this episode at authormedia.com/446. I'm Thomas Umstattd Jr., host of the Novel Marketing Podcast, saying thank you for listening and live long and prosper.